Kolesar, and he is here. And I think most of us know him, but it's a good fortune to have him with us this evening. There's no person better able to help our council understand current efforts to improve the flow regimen on the Upper Delaware. His professional biography was emailed to all members. I think Peter told me that he forwarded his bio to all the recipients. So everybody might have it. If I were to start reading it from beginning to end, it's so long with the achievements and accolades. It would be in the fifth inning of the World Series game. So we'll. All I'll say is that in 2005, but I did want to mention that the two most recent that I'm aware of awards were the Legal Conservation Award, and just last month, a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Water Association of the Delaware River Basin. So with Lifetime Achievement Awards and Conservation Awards and dozens of others, we're fortunate to have that expertise at our disposal. In 2005, Dr. Kolesar questioned if the water release policies on the Delaware were optimum for the benefit of the river ecosystem. And since for 17 years, he has pursued this quest. And tonight, he's been here before, at least once or twice. Tonight, he will bring us up to date. So I give you Professor Kolesar. The floor is yours.
Or is it a clicker? Where would you like me to? Where would you like me to be?
Stand wherever
Daniel
you
the
like.
Lion stand here. Okay, after that introduction, I better not screw this up. Okay, so it's a pleasure to be here again. It's been a number of times over these many years as these issues have developed and our struggles with we call them sometimes the watercrats, the people from the 4 states and New York City together own part of these resources and manage these resources. It's always been a struggle to get their attention on the ecology of our little portion of the river, this upper river, and its trout. But when I got involved in this to start with, I never thought we'd have any success. So it really is quite a joy that we have achieved not all, but a lot of our goals. And so I'm going to give you a kind of status report on the last part of that work. I often open the talks with this photograph, which I try to capture with these photos of the issues before us. You know, the beauty of the river, the obligation to meet the water needs of New York City and Philadelphia and Trenton. More than 20 million people depend on the river for the water, and managing those reservoirs, and then our beautiful rainbow trout from just a little ways upriver here. So my theme this evening is thermal mitigation experience, and I'm going to focus on this last summer. I'll be making some comments on what has happened in the past. And I'll divide this in 2 parts. A good number of folks I recognize from past talks, and you are probably really up on all these issues, but some others are new. And so with that in mind, I'll give a little bit of a background and overview of the thermal issue and this protocol that we have in place. Where does it come from and why are we doing this kind of thing? And then I'll talk about the details of what happened this year. The issue basically is that during the summer, you get heat waves, the air warms up, the water warms up, and it warms up to an extent that can be lethal for the trout. That's conditions, particularly during heat waves. So we have had in place the FFMP program, which basically gives us releases that are adequate most of the time, but not during these heat waves. So we're talking this evening about what happens during these heat waves. As a consequence of this, things can get really bad for trout. As an example, in the decade between 2008 2018, there were 78 days in which, during the summer, in which water temperatures got to a point which is dangerous and potentially lethal for trout. So it has happened even under the FFMP, which I played some role in designing, that we couldn't overcome that issue. And sometimes it got really bad. Summer of 2010, there were 20 days when the temperature exceeded 75 degrees. Any of you who are fisher people will really recognize that that is really, really terrible for the fish. And in fact, 68 degrees is something that no fisherman would really like to see. So we do have a problem. And that problem has been recognized for quite a while, many years. And after considerable research on it, and I played a pretty big role in that research, and activism, and you folks played a very big role in the activism. After more than a decade of struggle on this issue, we finally got agreement from the decree parties who have their fingers on the resources to try to alleviate that issue. Okay, so we have in place now, in addition to the FFMP, on top of that is this thermal mitigation protocol. And here's what it wants to do. We cannot, there's not enough water in the reservoirs to protect all the river down to, say, Callicoon and Harrisburg. That can't be done. So the point is to focus a bit further upriver at Lordville and to try to make sure that Lordville daily temperatures never exceed 75 degrees. Try to forecast when that might happen and take a countermeasure by releasing cold water in advance, timed to nip that problem in the bud. That's the basic idea. Keep summertime Lordville daily maximum temperatures below 75 degrees via timed pulses of cold water, primarily from the Cannonsville Reservoir, when it's anticipated, forecasted Lordville temperatures otherwise exceed 75 degrees. So you can see the nub of the problem then. You've got to be able to make those forecasts. That's not easy to do. And then you also have to know how much water to use, and you want to be very, very sparing because I'm not going to allocate too much water. It's a rather difficult gambling problem. The way it's done is the decree parties have allocated 2,500 cubic feet per second days of water. It's an amount of water that if you release, for example, 100 cubic feet per second flow, which is a pretty big flow, if you release that 100 CFS for 25 days, you use up all that water. So we have that bank. The bank opens. There's a bookkeeping that goes together with this. The bank opens on June 1st of the year. It's the water year, and it carries forward to May 31st of the following year. A strange way to do things. The use of the bank is at the discretion of New York State DEC. So there are no hard rules about what to be done. The bank has been established, that's a hard rule. DEC can manage it, but there are guidelines, and the guidelines were developed with the subcommittee of ecological flows of the DRBC. I was a member of that group. You all probably know Jeff Skelding from FUDR, was a member of that group. Jim Serio, who many of you know and participated here, was also a member of that group. So we had a good deal of influence, and the guidelines we think are reasonably satisfactory. Give you a sense of the geography, what's going on here. Cannonsville Reservoir, Papacton Reservoir, East Branch and West Branch coming together at Hancock. What this protocol focuses on is the reach of the river from Hancock to Lordville. That's in green on this map. And the idea is then to keep that below the 75-degree maximum. That's not ideal for the trout, but it's better and essentially kind of livable and an okay situation. Okay. So as I said, the reality is that these releases are gambles. It's very easy to make mistakes. It's easy to release water when it's not really needed because you got a bad forecast or maybe misinterpreted the forecast to perhaps not release water when it's needed or to release the wrong quantity. So the gentleman who runs this at New York State DEC has some guidelines which we constructed for him using some statistical analysis, but they are guidelines, and every morning he has to get up He has to look at the gauges, look at the temperatures, look at the forecast, and decide what to do. These decisions are guided imperfectly by mathematical analysis. We have models of river thermodynamics, which we know are imperfect weather forecasts, and under stringent time constraints. At 8 o'clock in the morning, he has a short window in which he has to do his calculations, make a call up to New York City people who run the reservoirs and the river master and call for a release. So it's a pretty quick decision. And he's got a limited budget of this 2,500 CFS days of water. And the question is, should I use it now? Oh, well, wait a second now, it's only June. Do I use it now or do I wait and until August when things might get worse? Pretty tricky situation. I don't want to dwell on this, but you get a flavor of the complexity of what's going on here. Cannonsville, Papacton, there's water in there. The water is coming out. The water comes out at different temperatures. In addition, a good deal of the water that comes into the river and winds up at Lordville comes from the Beaver Kill. That water is typically considerably warmer, and the weather has an important impact. Precipitation, sunshine, cloud cover, wind velocity, all that has an impact. The big factor is air temperature. Big factor, but it's not the only factor. I want to get across the idea here with this chart. You see the red line going up is showing that Lordville water temperatures go up when Binghamton air temperatures go up, but there's a lot of scatter around that. That's the uncertainty in the forecast. Why is there scatter? Because there's also influence of how hot the water already is, let's say coming from the Beaver Kill, etc. So this gentleman making his decisions is aware of this, is aware of the uncertainty, and he's using the Binghamton forecast, where I'm showing you here, the Binghamton forecast this summer during July, day by day. So the orange line was the actual daily maximum temperature at Binghamton, and the blue line was the forecast. As you can see, the two move together, but rather imperfectly. So there are days when there's a 5-degree error. Generally, they're doing a pretty good job. So he's using that kind of data to make these decisions. So with that as background, let's talk a little bit about what has happened this summer. I call this executive summary. You know? Okay, we can't have summaries anymore. We have to have executive summaries. So basically, here's what happened. During the summer, which is roughly 120 days, the temperatures were kept below 75 degrees, which was the goal, except for 4 days. Probably pretty good, I would judge. I hope that you would agree with me. The highest temperature was July 21st, which was 76.5, which went above the 75, but not a lot. And what you should know is that each one of those 4 days, they tried. They made thermal releases. They didn't quite release enough. The forecast perhaps a little bit better. They might have hit a target. Okay. They made 23 requests during the summer for thermal releases, and they used up most, but not all, the bank. When we got into August, those of us involved with this were getting quite nervous that the bank would be depleted. Luckily, that didn't happen, but that is a fear of one of the remaining questions. Is that bank size big enough? Because it was set rather arbitrarily by the three parties. And I think that's an issue that we may want to come back to at one point. Now, conversely, what would have happened had they not made the thermal releases? So we don't really know, but I have a way of estimating it. From historical research I did some years back, I have a notion of what the impact of these releases are. And my judgment is, had they not made the releases, there would have been another 9 days going above 75, and it would have gone considerably higher above 75. In retrospect, I can also make a judgment that 7 of those releases probably were not actually needed had they been able to make a perfect forecast. And that's the nature of the gamble. Sometimes you hit it, sometimes you don't hit it exactly, okay? And by the way, it's not a subject for tonight, but maybe some future discussion. took an overview of it's now been operating for 4 years. Over the 4 years, basically, this program has been reasonably successful. But I want to continue to talk about this summer. So here's the way I look at this. This is a chart for the summer from May to September. That's the timeline. And it's showing the Lordville temperatures. That's the blue line. Notice the red line, which is our 75-degree limit, which in Celsius is 23.9 degrees. So anytime the blue goes above the red, that's a violation of our goals. And if you look really closely, you see the 2 points distinctly above, including the June 21st one. There's one that just hits, there's one that's just below, and there was one data point that was missing when the gauge was down. And my judgment is on that day when the data is missing, it would have probably gone above. So you get a sense of what's happening here and a sense of the difficulty of the problem, how these temperatures fluctuate and vary throughout the summer. So we don't have an easy task here of trying to manage this thing. It's not an aquarium, it's a big complicated piece of nature. Oh, my little animation here pointing to those. I get extra bonus points for that. Okay. So I want to take a look at was this program successful? And I have two ways of looking at it. One way of looking at it is take advantage of the research that we've done over the years, where I know an estimate that approximately a 100 cubic feet per second pulse out of Cannonsville will reduce the Lordville temperatures by about 1 degree Fahrenheit. That's not precise. I mean, it's an estimate that comes in perfectly from some data, but I use that as a kind of ballpark estimate. Essentially, I'm going to do what we call simulation. I go back into the history and do what if those releases hadn't been made, et cetera. So here's a chart. It's a little probably too busy to absorb here, but you've got the notes if you wanted to look at it. What I did was I did day by day by day, every time they made a release. So for example, just look with me at the first row, 30th of May, that was the first release that they made, which was an additional 200 cubic feet per second was released from Cannonsville. The actual temperature that day was 20.7. You see, he feared it was going to go up to that 23.9, but it didn't. And I estimate that had he not made that release, it would have been about 1 degree hotter, about 1 degree hotter. So going down the column, down these rows, I have the column of the actual temperatures day by day when they made releases, and then my estimate of what would have happened. I just call your attention to the green entries. The green entries are days when they made a release and they possibly didn't quite need to. They would have stayed under our benchmark. The red ones are the more interesting ones. They're the ones where they made a release, but the release wasn't really quite enough, and we get above the 23.9 degrees. So overall, that's where I get this notion that Lordville temperatures would have stayed below the benchmark on 7 of the days when they made releases, and conversely, that on 9 of the days, had they not made releases, we would have been in worse shape. So that's one way to take a look at it. Also, I can see that overall, these releases lowered the maximum temperatures over the summer by about 2.4 degrees Fahrenheit on these 21 days. Now, another way we look at it is kind of interesting and somewhat more complicated, and I kind of refer to what's been happening with COVID. You know that when they tested the vaccines, what they would do is they would divide the population and people who got an actual vaccine and those get the placebo, and they make a comparison. So the placebo people are the controls. Here, I want to look for a control. What we have discovered is that there's a gauge on the East Branch at Fish's Eddy, and the temperatures at Fish's Eddy and the temperatures at Lordville are very, very closely correlated under normal conditions. So I think that Fish's Eddy is a control variable. And what we're going to see is that every time a thermal release is made, the temperatures at Lordville are knocked down relative to Fish's Eddy. So we use that as a way of judging whether things are really working well. That's my basic idea here. So if you take a look at how that works, and this might be interesting to you about the river dynamics. The orange line here, and I'm looking for a period from July 22nd to July 24th. The orange are the releases out of Cannonsville Reservoir, actually is measured by a gauge at Sizeville. You see what's going along is the release is about 650. That was a thermal release. Then it drops down to 500, which is a normal FFMP release. And then it jumps up again. So you see those plateaus. Each of those plateaus is exactly one of these pulses. And he's trying to time those pulses to knock the temperatures down. What happens is that water has to travel downriver to Lordville. And so the blue line are the water flows at Lordville. And what we know is that there's about a 12-hour time lag. So you can see that the first orange plateau, and then look for that the blue plateau, it's 12 hours later. And it's also softened a bit because water's coming in from the tributaries, etc. Okay. So that's the idea. We're trying to get the blue pulses to happen when we fear the water temperatures will be high. And why is he doing that? Because he had Binghamton forecasts for those days. On the 22nd of July, they forecast 85 degrees. We know that when Binghamton gets well above 80, there's going to be trouble in the river. So on July 22nd, 85 degrees, July 23rd, 88 degrees, July 24th, 89 degrees. That's why Brennan Carrier made those releases. What impact does it have? So here's the same chart now, repeated, but I've added the black line, which are the Lordville temperatures. And the Lordville temperatures are wavering a bit, and we have been keeping them below the red line. But they fluctuate, and basically he is getting the impact he wants of getting the cold water at Lordville when he needs it to top that peak off. I will pause for a second, by the way. Is it this clear? Okay, great. Yeah, okay. So now I'm making more complicated. I love spaghetti diagrams here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add Fish's Eddy. Fish's Eddy is my control variable. So Fish's Eddy is the yellow line. So I didn't want to bore us down here with too many slides, but if I showed you the past history, you would see Fish's Eddy and Lordville moving together very close to one another. And what happens here is we see those two lines, the black line and the yellow line, are separating exactly because of those thermal releases that are coming out of Cannonsville. So basically, we see this over and over again. It's one of the metrics that we have. It really is reassuring us that this program is working reasonably well. Just to emphasize the points, this is the same chart here. I just took the other stuff out of the way and to emphasize the point that we're looking at the difference between the black line and the yellow line. Okay, so that's basically a story of what happened this summer. And I thought that I would add to this presentation a very short overview of the drivers, the climatological factors that are influencing this thing, give you a little bit of a heads up of what we can see about what might be coming down the pipe. This was a strange summer. It was a very, very dry summer. It was a hot summer and a dry summer, luckily not super hot. So I have here, we use Binghamton air temperatures for most of our work. What we have is June, July, August, daily maximum temperatures. I have emphasized in red the 80.9 degrees in August. So August was considerably higher than the previous year, which was 78.5, and importantly, higher than what the Weather Bureau calls the long run normal. The long run normal for Binghamton, which is 76.7. So that's a pretty big difference. Pretty big difference. That's the average for all of August. Yes, so June was cooler. June was cooler. July was also hot. And August was also hot. But the hottest one relative to the long run was August.
Yeah.
Now, the temperatures are important, but it's the heat waves that really kill you. So the other part of the chart are counting days over 80. Those are the ones we know you're in trouble. I just want to call particularly your attention to August again, 19 days in August over 80, as compared to the long run average of only about 11. So August was bad, not just on the average, but we had those peaks, and those are the peaks that are causing the thermal stress. So summer 2022 was warmer than 2021 and warmer than the 30-year so-called normal from the Weather Bureau. Precipitation, we're all very aware of how dry this summer was. And dryness causes us two kinds of problems. One is a lack of precipitation means less water coming into the river. That could be a cooling factor. But also, very importantly, less water is coming into the reservoirs. And we depend on water in the reservoir to make these releases. If the reservoir levels drop, they're going to stop this program. So we were getting very nervous toward the end of the summer. We could see the reservoir levels getting down perilously close to where they might have shut down the thermal relief program.
Hey, Peter, can I jump in quick? Just
Sure.
to put everything into perspective, I manage the upper Sophus Creek, where the Schoharie Reservoir comes in and adds that cold water storage. And by August this year, we ran out of that.
Woohoo.
You know, so it's, yeah, like you mentioned,
Yeah.
extremely important.
Really, really important. So here's the precipitation. And again, you see it's different. You remember that early part of the summer, we had a good deal of precipitation. Focusing again on August, we had only 3.32 inches of precipitation in August compared to 6 the previous summer and 4.1 the long run average. So both things hit us. Mercifully, we got through okay. So I thought it'd be interesting to close out with a little observation or fearful of what might be happening. Climate change having global impact, but what's the impact here in the Catskills? So looking at a couple of data sets here that are of relevance to us. Binghamton, daily average temperatures. We know it's a driver for our problems. So this is a chart. Now the time span now goes from 1960 to 2022, and we can see these are the summertime daily averages. And I think it's important to look at the summertime because summer and winter is different, our climate is different, and the driver of these problems are summer temperatures. You see the big fluctuations of those temperatures, and I put in here a trend line, statistical trend line, which we could project ahead. So I don't know, it'd be interesting what your reaction is to this. I thought, well, luckily, maybe this is not as bad as I feared, but you can see that there definitely is an upward slope. And if we project ahead a decade, it would be another 1/4 degree Fahrenheit increase. So that's increase, not devastating yet, I kind of suspect. The next chart is, again, I want to be concerned with days over 80 degrees, not just the temperatures. So the similar idea, 1960, 2022, the points for each of those summers and the trend line, and projecting ahead for a decade about an additional 0.75, 3/4 of a day, a number of additional days over 80. So things are getting tougher, but not extraordinarily so. I wanted to look also at precipitation. This is a Binghamton summer precipitation. Once again, 1960 up to, now why, I just see my chart goes 1983. I'm not sure why I did that. But I kind of screwed that one up a bit. But again, projecting ahead about an additional 2 inches of precipitation. So we know from the weather modeling, it's pretty well recognized that we're likely to have increasing temperature and increasing precipitation, and increasing precipitation may be a help to us. But one of the concerns is that the increasing precipitation they come in the form of pretty nasty storms that may have other effects on you. I looked at water temperatures in the Catskills. I couldn't look at in Delaware because the Delaware is so managed by our FFMP program. So I wanted to look at something where it's really just nature happening. And I did that by looking at the Beaver Kill. There's a gauge at Cooks Falls on the Beaver Kill, and we could see an increase in temperatures on the Beaver Kill. But you know, we're so dependent on the gauges, and the gauges on the Beaver Kill were out during this long interval, 2010 up to 2017. So we have a gap in the record. Again, projecting ahead, an increase perhaps to be concerned with, but not perhaps devastating. Some Delaware temperatures, same kind of thing happening. This is Calhoun, but there's an impact here of both the weather and also our manipulation and control of the water releases, which has a pretty big impact. Let me close out with a couple of observations on issues that are before us, and maybe research issues and activism issues. Let me say something about activism. One of the reasons I'm happy to be here is you folks have played a significant role over the years in getting us to where we are with this program, because you have been part of that movement of activism and political maneuvering, as well as those of us who are doing research to get the decree parties to listen and pay attention to the concerns of the upper river. So it may come a time when we will need some more activism. And one of the issues that I'm concerned with is the size of that thermal bank. We've almost run out of the water a couple of times, and it could happen in the future. And I believe that there is evidence that the bank could and should be bigger at little risk to the other stakeholders, basically New York City, Philadelphia, and Trenton. We're talking about small amounts of water relative to their usage. There's also some research issues in the way and details about the way this program is run. New York State DEC is doing quite a good job of making short pulses. So if you could shorten the pulse and make the timing more precise, you could possibly save water. So that's a bit of research to be done in the future. And fishermen are also concerned with whether that 75-degree target is. A lot of people in the fishing community think that is much too dangerous, and we should be looking at some other targets. The question is how necessary is that for the health of trout, and how much water is there available for this kind of use? An interesting trade-off. And this idea of the bank strategy. I've always been of the view that the water is not in the bank, the water is in the reservoir.
Yeah, that's right.
And the bank is like the Social Security Trust Fund. That's an imaginary accounting, you know. So I'm always looking at the water in the reservoir. And what I fear could happen, it certainly happened in the past, that the reservoir would be full, the bank would be empty, and the decree parties would say we can't make a release because the rules are the bank rules. That happened back in the past before the FFMP was put in. We had a time, and it was 2004. Temperatures got into the 90s. Water temperature rose up. The reservoir was full of water, and they released like 100 cubic feet per second. You could walk across the river at Lordville and not get wet above your ankles. So that's a real fear. There we are, folks. Questions, I'd be happy to answer.
So if New York City is successful reducing their leakage, you could probably triple your bank.
Yes.
Because relative, if my memory serves me right, relative to your bank, the water that's wasted in these leakage areas is humongous.
That's right.
So they're supposedly in the next couple of years they'll complete their project. Maybe you can renegotiate
Well, true.
based on that.
Very true. I think everyone is looking at that water, and hopefully that will happen next year. The plan is they were going to do it this year,
Yeah.
but they had some implementation issues, and so it's been delayed for next year.
This is a little tongue in cheek.
Yes.
Maybe you could add this to the element of that you would use to come to a judgment like this thing. Based on how often in the summer I don't have to cut my lawn.
No, no. You're making me really nervous now because I have to tell you a story.
Okay,
The very first time I got involved in this, I went to a DRBC meeting back in 2005 after this crisis of the and the Fisher people are arguing for more water. And the representative from one of the other states, not from New York, I won't embarrass him by saying anything. He said, I'm sick and tired of you fishermen coming here and complaining year after year after year. We knew when we designed the program that it would only work 50% of the time. And so every other year you're coming here and complaining. I've got landscapers who have to water the lawns. More important than you and your
I bet you Phil Chase was at that meeting.
Catskill Water started it.
Yes, yes.
I was on Catskill Water's board
Uh-huh,
when I was in college,
yes.
and we used to meet at the, in Roscoe at,
The diner.
no, the
Well,
restaurant.
before the
What
diner.
was the name of the restaurant? The
Antrim.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Bill Chase, but that was, kind of the beginning of demanding water.
Well, so, tip of the hat to these folks. What happened was that there were no conservation releases. And what they did was they managed to compel New York State, the Governor Carey, to institute the first conservation releases. And what they did was New York State actually forced the others, because New York State violated the rules. The rules were that they had to act in unison. And New York State said, no, we're imposing these rules. And that's the beginning of this whole long, painful program that got us to where we are now, where things are considerably better than we were back.
It was a lawsuit.
Yes.
Louis Lefkowitz embarked on a lawsuit.
Yeah.
And that started the whole negotiation, so to speak.
Yeah,
If I remember right. So,
yeah, that is.
is there an established correlation between the expected percent of mortality and the temperature rise? I mean, if it goes up to 76,
Oh,
is there some percent that you could predict you're likely to lose in trout?
no, it's a tricky thing because it depends, not only depends on the temperature, but it depends on the time that the fish are exposed to that temperature. And the counter argument, why this is really not such a bad idea, is in the river, there are always cold pools where the fish go to hide out. So our basic idea is if we can keep the maximum from getting above 75, the fish will find a way to survive. The data that's available are data that are done in laboratory experiments. And so what is known is that 75 degrees over a certain number of hours is lethal. I don't recall what that time is, but it's maybe like 8 hours and 12 hours or something like that. And that does not typically happen in our river.
isn't it the dissolved oxygen? I'm trying to remember, but at 75, the dissolved oxygen is insufficient. I think that's a big part of the mortality, isn't it?
I'm not sure. It's a combination of oxygen, but also the metabolism of the trout. The trout are being a cold-blooded species. Their metabolism is hooked to the environment temperature. And what is known is that when they get to 68 degrees, they start to be in any way efficient. They start losing weight rather than gaining weight. So for a trout to be healthy, it has to be in water below 61 degrees. If we went back to my map I showed you earlier on, you notice that the West Branch is always below 68 degrees, also below. The East Branch part is pretty good. And this section that we're talking about here from Hancock to Pelican is vulnerable. And the springtime is good all the way down to Calicoon. But at 68 degrees, the benchmark, we actually say among the fishing community that folks shouldn't go out fishing if it's
16.
Yeah, we got one more question, Bill.
Just curiosity, you said from the time they release that to the time we can see the water bill is 12 hours?
Yes,
Okay, I just wanted to clarify
yeah,
that.
approximately, I guess like
Yeah.
11 point something.
Yeah, right, yeah, 12.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right,
Hey, Peter, I have a question if you have time to answer one more. This is
Sure.
Don Hamilton. Hey, as you know, New York City DEP plans to draw down Cannonsville and Papacton in 2023 in order to dewater the Delaware aqueduct for repair work next October. Do you have any concerns about their adequate recharge for the thermal mitigation bank in 2024?
No, I think in general, we're going to have a good deal more water, but there's some concern that if it's a very, very dry period, they may not be able to refill as fast as they're calculating. So some members of the FUDR have done some calculations of that, and apparently it's a discussion item on the next meeting of the Regulated Flow Advisory Committee. But it's a kind of unresolved. People in FUDR are of concern, and the city has so far kind of blown that concern off. They haven't fully responded. It's almost like a no comment thing, which is typical of what they usually do.
all right, well, we'll kind of wrap up. I just want to put this a little bit in perspective. There was a time not too many years ago when these thermal events happened that you had to, I was a TU advocate, and we had to be calling the governor, the congressman, and trying to get all the states of decree parties to agree on the weekend to, okay, you can do a little thermal release, and it was horrible. This product that these folks, these scientists and mathematicians have come up with is absolutely incredible. We have a year of proof that it works, and we'd like to know if we'll be needed for advocacy in the future for an additional bank. I want to make one other point, and it has to do with the fishes. These are trout, like I just came from a community that has a multi-million-dollar engine, and it's a fishery at Pulaski.
Yes.
And there's so much money pouring into that town year round now. It's astounding. But when I came down from Pulaski and hit the Delaware River, it occurred to me that our fishery is a better quality than anywhere else in the East. It's absolute. We have an untapped economic engine here. There used to be a trout season that started on April 1st. In the old days, people stopped fishing around June. New York State has changed the regulations where you can fish for most species year round. So let's not undersell the notion how important this fishery is as a potential economic driver in our corridor. And I just want to also say, so that's my pitch, but I do want to say, can you imagine 17 years doing it? How much? He doesn't get paid a great deal for this. As a matter of fact, he gets paid nothing.
Nada.
He used to come and I used to give him a button. I don't even have a button for him tonight. So
Give him a t-shirt.
we have a
Oh, t-shirt. Oh, great. I love it. It has the map on the back.
One
Okay.
of those.
Okay.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
All right, I'll get you your teacher. All right, that was really a great presentation. We learned a lot today, and it was very wonderful. All right. All right. We'll get on to the Monday.